Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Legacy Preservation Initiative. This is a quick but very important overview that I'm going to give you. My name is Thomas Jones. I'm here with my wife, Laurel Jones, and we're going to be your presenters for today. So to introduce myself a little more, if you do know me, you probably know me as Bam. Well, my grandmother to the left of your screen there, Lily B. Jones, she's the daughter of Charles and Polly Ann Hicks. That's my grandmother. She raised me right up on the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks estate. In the center of the screen there, you see my mother, Beatrice Bogle. Most people call her BB. So, and then on the right, you'll see myself and my lovely wife, Laurel. And so we're going to be your presenters, but that's me. So just so you know who you are listening to, but again, know that we're family. Okay, so now Laurel is actually going to take it away, and she's going to give us a quick and brief overview of the history of our family and where we find ourselves now situationally. So Laurel, if you will, just take it away.
Well, it's my pleasure to talk a little bit about Charles and Polly Ann Hicks. So Charles and Polly Ann Hicks. Charles was born in 1838 and Polly Ann Hicks was born in 1883. Charles was a Civil War veteran and the only person known in Georgia to fight on both sides of the war. Think about that. The Confederate side and then ultimately the Union Army. For his service, Charles received a pension for many years prior to his death, and that was the money that he was able to use and leverage to buy the property that is now the estate for the Hickses. So Polly Ann was a distinguished midwife. The two, Charles and Polly Ann, married in June of 1900 in Montgomery County, Georgia. There are a couple of articles that we've captured that also talk about the influence and the impact that Charles Hicks had. In this article, you can see that the title, Tombs Negroes Served Both Blue and Gray, which talks to his service on both the Union and the Confederate side. We see another article that also talks about him being from Vidalia, serving on both the North and the South. Definitely newsworthy activities. And here we see the same, where he served with both armies in the Civil War. And that was noted in a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania newspaper. So his influence was widespread. So here we are at the beginning of the beginning. What you see on your screen is the original Jordan Stream Church and School. Back in 1932, when Charles and Polly Ann purchased a sizable portion of land, what they did is designated a portion of that property for the purpose of building a church, establishing a cemetery, and providing classroom space for the very first school for colored children in the local area. That was back in 1932. Polly Ann was able to hold on to that family farm until her death in 1974. In 1975, all land, with the exception of the church and cemetery, were divided into 6 parcels and awarded to her 6 surviving children. Here you see the original heirs to the Hicks estate: Aileen Mason, Georgia May Dixon, William Hicks, Albertha Hicks, James A. Hicks, and Lily B. Jones. So those were the 6 original heirs to the Hicks estate, as we said, who received a portion of the original parcel of land.
Honey, if I may add something also, you may know, if you're really close, you'll know that there's one other sibling that's missing. That's Daisy Jones. And what happened, she passed away before Charles or Polly Ann passed away. That's why she's not listed as one of the original heirs. She's part of the family tree, but not one of the original heirs.
So here we'll talk about heirs property. So Jordan Stream Church was never formed as a legal entity. There was really just a name. And because of that, the church was unable to own any property. The church and cemetery are therefore considered heirs property. In 1982, when Albertha Hicks passed away, mysteriously her will was never found, and thus her parcel of land is also now considered heirs property. So a little bit more about, so what is heirs property? Well, a couple of things. For the simplest definition of what that is, that's when a home, or in this case land, passes from generation to generation without any legally designated owner. And that's exactly what happened with the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks estate. So when heirs property is created, it's when the owner dies without a will, leaving property to multiple relatives, or that owner dies without a will, so the property passes to heirs at law. So what's really important to you is, so what are the implications for you as an heir? Well, as an heir holding property, there is an increased risk of a forced sale. You can't sell or mortgage the property without the agreement of all of the heirs. You can't participate with any government programs, whether it's USDA or FEMA or any other agency, because again, there's no clear title owned by any one individual. Unfortunately, another implication is that family relationships may also be permanently ruined because of the issues associated with the intertwining of this property. And the last implication is that you can lose a connection of family history and community. So how would this particular heir's property be divided? Well, in this case, unless these small parcels that are collectively owned by the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks preserve, then the Hicks estate is at risk of being partitioned and lost through a forced sale. The 8 acres would be assigned a cash value, typically based upon an appraisal, and then that cash value upon final sale would be divided upon, in this case, the 100+ heirs that are involved in the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks estate. Now, let's say that those 8 acres are worth a combined total of $25,000. Then each heir would receive basically 1/100th, or a very small share of the total dollar amount. So here's the reality. And this applies not just to the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks estate, but over the past decade, thousands and thousands of acres of land and hundreds of African American cemeteries throughout the South are being neglected because of heirs' property laws. In the case of Jordan Stream and what remains of the Hicks estate, there's danger of it being lost from overgrowth or being bulldozed down and wiped out by unsympathetic real estate investors for the purpose of building new developments. There are currently over 100+ heirs involved with this estate, as I said earlier, thus making this a very expensive and time-consuming task. Here's another reality that you need to be aware of. We have already paid out over $15,000 in taxes. Now, in the current situation, the legal fees for clearing this heir's property with this many heirs, 100 as we've said, is estimated at $10,000 to $20,000. So here's what the Hicks estate looks like. We're talking about 8 acres. It's actually about 8.27, and then the church and the cemetery are an additional 2 acres. So the total estate, we'll round it and say are 10 acres that we're discussing. So we really believe that none of this property should be sold. Of course, the remaining 8 acres that are part of just the estate could be a forced sale. The 2 acres of the church and cemetery cannot be sold. But let's just say those 8 acres were sold at an average of $3,000 an acre, $24,000. But we're going to just round that up to $25,000 just for the easy math, as you'll see. Because right as we discussed earlier, we have 5 heirs, original heirs, and so that left $5,000 for each sibling. Of course, each of those heirs, as we all know, are deceased. And so the way that heirs property works, after we go from those individuals, the 5 that are listed, then you go into their family trees, and each of those families would receive $5,000 per heir. But because we're talking about the 5 there that we see listed, that's really 100 folks along that 5,000 each. So that so the numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the interest, as I said, it would be divided among those heirs, including spouses, children, siblings, etc. So here's the real crisis. Over the past decade, as we've talked about, thousands of acres and hundreds of African American cemeteries have been neglected because of heir property laws. Now, there's a Cemetery Preservation Alliance that says you need to think 20 to 50 years down the road. Are you still going to find that Jordan Stream Cemetery or any of the graves? They also say if you don't take care of them now, there will become a time where it's too late. And that is certainly not something that we want to see happen. So there are countless cases, as I've mentioned, and here you just see a few of the articles that address those matters. If you go to the website, thehickspreserve.org, you can actually read the full articles, but you can see how shocking the titles are. Historic Black Cemeteries Under Siege in the South. Black History Dies in Neglected Southern Cemeteries. Graveyards Destroyed for Mississippi Industrial Projects. We certainly don't want the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks estate to be another one of these devastating headlines. So if you go to the hickspreserve.org site, what you'll see is actually two plans, a Plan A and a Plan B. But what the Hicks Preserve LLC is really fostering as a great idea, not just a good idea, is Plan B. So the idea is to identify a credible nonprofit organization, and at that point, the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve LLC would be reformed and made into a nonprofit 501c3 organization with a managing board of directors. At that point, nonprofit fundraising activities will begin and a paid position, an executive director, would be assigned. We see some of the other things that go along with that. Of course, the primary mission of the 501c3 would really be to solicit donations and generating income for the purpose of identifying, restoring, preserving, protecting, and promoting public awareness of the Jordan Stream Church Cemetery, as well as other endangered, neglected, and or abandoned African American cemeteries. The 501c3 would use the adjoining parcels of land for additional burials or other activities deemed appropriate for generating income. And then finally, the 501c3 will ensure that former heirs closest to Charles and Polly Ann Hicks, the grandchildren, would have burial space in the church cemetery at no cost.
Okay, so that's the plan, and we'll be able to explain that a little bit more in depth when we have a conversation or what have you. We can also have the attorney on board if we need to, but we definitely want to keep this in the family, and we want it to outlive all of us. So I'm going to turn it back over to Laurel, and she can sort of give us a review and wrap this up. Laurel?
All right, now we've talked about a lot of information, so I'm going to go through with a few slides, just kind of a summary what we've talked about. So how much land is included? Well, we know that there are 3 parcels of land, and that totals approximately 10 acres. You know, we talked about 2 for the church and cemetery and 8 for the other parcel. How many heirs are involved? Currently over 100 heirs.
Over 100 heirs.
And if you go to the About the Hickses page on the hickspreserve.org website, you'll see the family trees, which will give you some more information on that. So how much is the land worth? Well, because of the number of heirs, over 100, the small size and condition of the parcel, the amount that there's already been a tax expenditure of over $15,000, and the high cost of legal fees, the estate doesn't offer any real monetary value. However, anybody reading about this rich legacy, and certainly anyone that we're talking to as a family, I think you will agree that this project and this land is priceless. So some may be asking, can we sell the land and split the money? Well, it certainly wouldn't be wise, and it's actually close to impossible to sell the church and cemetery. So that leaves about 8.2 acres of wooded land, which is in very poor condition for a market sale. Now, if the land was sold, as we talked about earlier, for the generous amount of $3,000 per acre, that would only generate less than $25,000. Because of the number of heirs, again, over 100, and all of the previous tax expenditures and legal fees, and because there's no clear title, there really isn't any monetary value. So how much are the annual taxes on the property? Well, as we've said before, Albertha Hicks passed away in 1982, and since that time, total taxes have been paid of over $15,000. Just for the year of 2018, the tax amount was $612.
And actually, those taxes there have not been paid yet.
So who's been taking care of the land? Well, a couple of family members occupied Albertha Hicks's home the immediate years after her passing, but the house has since been abandoned, it's rotted out, and the land overgrown. As far as the taxes, those have been paid by family members, my husband Thomas Jones, and my mother-in-law Beatrice Bogle. So you may be asking, why should we do anything about it now? Well, as I said earlier, You need to think 20 to 50 years down the road. Are you still going to be able to find this cemetery, any of the graves? They also say if you don't take care of them now, there will become a time when it's too late. So what will happen if we don't do anything? Well, on 2 separate occasions already, the land has been posted for auction by the county for non-payment of taxes. So, who else can help us? Will the government help take care of the property? Right now, there's no governmental agency nor any state or county funds available for maintenance or protection from overzealous real estate developers. Is the Charles Hicks estate or Charles Hicks grave considered a National Historic Landmark? Now, we mentioned many references to Charles Hicks in the official archives of Georgia. Unfortunately, his grave nor his estate have been recorded in the National Historic Landmarks catalog. As part of this initiative, that is one of the goals, to actually have his grave registered as a National Historic Landmark. So hopefully after hearing this, you're asking, what can I do to help? Well, there are 2 things you can do. The first thing is to donate. Donate, donate, donate. It's an expensive proposition. You see the tax money that has already been expended and the work that needs to be done going in the future. So we ask you to prayerfully consider making a meaningful donation. And then secondly, we want you to register on the website. So what is the call to action? Well, what we need is that every family member involved understand that this is an urgent crisis that will become even more difficult. So we highly urge all heirs of the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks estate to contact the Preserve LLC, to go to the website hickspreserve.org and complete a descendant registration form. Once you're registered, you'll be contacted and presented with the necessary legal documents to complete and transfer your interest in the estate. Once registered, you'll also receive regular updates and briefings relative to the progress of this undertaking. All heirs must agree to transfer their interest in the estate over to the Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve LLC via quit-claim deed. The Charles and Polly Ann Hicks Preserve will serve as collective owner of the estate. So the most important call to action is to register and then to complete the quit-claim deeds. And all of that information can be found on the hickspreserve.org website.
Yes, and let me repeat that one. That's at www.thehickspreserve.org. And at the end of this presentation, you're going to see that address as well.
So these are some of our partners. We've obviously been really fortunate to collaborate with James Lewis, Esquire. He's located in Atlanta, and very interesting. He's very passionate about this topic of heirs property because he himself has been involved with this with his own family's property located in Georgia. So he is one of our prime partners and supporters. We also have used the Georgia Heirs Property Law Center as a resource. So at this point, we just want to thank you all for spending some time with us. Hopefully you've taken in this information and you're ready to make good on that call to action. So please join us and do your part to help restore, preserve, and provide perpetual care to the historic Jordan Stream Cemetery.
Thanks a lot, L'Oreal, for sharing that very, very important information. Thanks a lot for your time and attention, and we'll be seeing you guys really soon. So take care. God bless.